Hello everyone, and welcome to the session Opportunities, Expressions, and Impressions. My name is Yara Sadetsky, and we are having today a fascinating lecture by Kayt MacMaster and Sara Mininsohn from the University of Illinois. Kayt is a dancer and a heritage studies scholar. She creates and performs dances that investigate relations between beings and places. Sara is a dance artist and a writer who researches contamination and instability in human and more than human worlds. So some technicalities before we will start. In order to keep enough time for the discussion, I will inform about the time after 18 minutes. And following the lecture, the discussion session will start. If you have a question or a comment, you are more than welcome to raise a hand using the Zoom reactions. So I wish you all an enjoyable session and fruitful discussion. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. My name is Sara Mininsohn.
I'm Kayt MacMaster.
And today we're presenting our research titled Bridging Dance and Animal Studies, Embodiment as an Approach to Interspecies Entanglement. Before we begin, we're going to be showing some videos as part of our presentation. And the quality tends to be a little bit better if everyone turns off their cameras. So if you could turn them off for the duration of this presentation, we'd really appreciate it. And we also would like to acknowledge that we carried out this research and are giving this presentation from the University of Illinois system, which carries out its mission in its namesake state, Illinois, which includes ancestral lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Miskaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. We have a responsibility to acknowledge these Native nations and to work with them as we move forward with our research.
From 2019 to 2020, Sara and I worked collaboratively on a choreographic process, which culminated in a dance performed by 9 undergraduate dancers at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. The dance, entitled Herd Tale, based its research on the entangled relationships between humans and cattle in the Midwestern United States. Our research question was, how can dance reimagine human-animal hierarchies using embodiment as an empathetic tool?
From January to March 2020, we began this project with a curiosity about the role of female characters in familiar American folklore and the role that these folktales were intended to play in the lives of American women. This research brought us to the trope of the hybrid beast, which would guide the next phase of our research. In May through August 2020, we were in residence on a centennial cattle farm in northern Michigan, where we observed cattle and improvised dances in relationship to their movement. And in August through November of 2020, we were commissioned to choreograph a dance for undergraduate students at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. This process combined our research in folklore and our research on cattle to create a collaborative performance.
For today's presentation, we will look at our research process using 3 analytical lenses. Broadly, they're borrowed from Laban movement analysis. And for the sake of this presentation, I'll briefly describe what each section or what each category refers to. Body refers to the physical body and its most basic movements. It answers the question, what is moving? Space addresses the body in relation to its environment and answers the question, where is the body in space and where is it going? Effort refers to the quality of movement. This often addresses the emotional content conveyed by that quality. Effort answers the question, how is the body moving?
We will begin with our preliminary research phase. In folklore and mythology, a hybrid beast is a beast that embodies 2 animals at once, or a human and an animal. We were compelled by the implications of outsiderness that this trope carried, which would relate to later research on notions of the herd and the runaway. When examining folklore through the lens of gender, the old crone often represents a cautionary tale for the maiden, dare she run away. The herd implies safety, where running away from the herd implies deviating from social norms and therefore danger. Some common maiden and crone examples are the princess who turns into the swan in the ballet Swan Lake, and the witch character Baba Yaga, seen in Eastern European folklore, who lives in a house on chicken legs at the edge of the woods. In this case, the old crone lives in a body that has decayed so far from social expectations, it's questionable whether she is human.
Based in the Midwestern region of the United States, a region whose economy is dominated by agriculture, we found ourselves in a premium location to observe contemporary practices as well as the ruins of an agricultural society, particularly cattle farming. In reference to the previously mentioned herd and runaway archetypes, we investigated metaphorical distances between domestic and wild or untamed spaces. While the ruins of historical farmhouses made us think about the outside taking over human spaces, ongoing herd practices, such as the creation of cow paths or the trails tamped in a field after cattle take the same pathway over and over again, led us to consider the domestic placemaking habits of the more than human.
Much of our early research on folklore and mythology led us to consider the range of ways in which femininity is portrayed and how these portrayals might lend themselves to embodiments of feminine behavior. In light of our focus on the maiden, crone, and cattle herds, we were compelled by the archetype of the American cowgirl and how that archetype embodies American history and American imagination. We then imagined this figure as a hybrid cow-girl, half cow and half girl. This would be the foundation of embodied research driven by empathy and further investigation of notions of the herd and the runaway.
Now we'll move on to phase 2, which was our choreographic process. Having settled on this hybrid notion of half cow and half girl, we began an improvisational exploration on what it might feel like to embody a cow and a girl at the same time. We considered how a human spine is vertical, while a cow's spine is horizontal, or in the case of this picture, it's actually a cat whose spine is demonstrating that. And we thought about how the position of the spine causes the body to operate differently on the sagittal plane, as in the way it moves forward and backward. For instance, with the horizontal spine, the rib cage is more parallel to the ground than perpendicular. The pelvis tips forward rather than sitting square on top of the legs. Rather than feet, we consider the operation of hooves at the end of our legs. And we thought about how this entire structure impacts the carriage of the body's weight. And we have a couple of examples of videos that document this part of our research process.
All right, and here's another set of videos. We addressed space in this piece of our work by working on the site of the cattle farm. We observed the cattle's movement as individuals and the movement of the herd, focusing on spatial relationships between individual cattle, as you can see in the video on the left. We also improvised in outdoor spaces near the cattle on soft ground. We would later revisit these improvisations to generate choreography indoors in a dance studio.
When translating this movement from outdoor to indoor and from improvised movement to repeatable choreography, we aim to hold on to certain movement qualities observed in cattle, such as the whip-like quality of the spine, the flicking of the head, and the weight distribution on the sagittal plane. Bringing it back to considerations of hybridity, we layered forms of hyper-femininity on top of these bovine qualities. Some of this expression came from a weighted pelvis combined with a light, expressive upper body. This video demonstrates how some of the qualities were translated into set choreography.
Great, and the third phase of our project is the group rehearsal and performance process. Translating this research onto a group of dancers involved an embodied process of building a herd. When we observed cattle, even though they moved in a herd, their individuality was visible. This individuality within the herd became an important component of our group work. Due to the pandemic, there was an unconventional audition process in which we did not see the dancers before they joined the dance project. In the choreography, we used unison yet valued individuality within it. The choreography generated a sense of 9 individuals dancing together. This video is an example of how individual and herd-like qualities can also be in a hybrid relationship.
Even though we were creating a dance ultimately for a concert stage, we wanted to bring in visual elements of our research on the cattle farm. So a set designer assisted us in creating this stage setup in this picture. And on the stage setup, we projected an image of the ruins of a farmhouse, which was a house nearby the farm where we carried out our research. The projections changed to convey grass in a cattle pasture. Those were videos and photos that we took while we were on the cattle farm in Michigan. And additionally, the set pieces created an element of landscape for the dancers or hybrid creatures to place make within throughout the dance.
We're now going to show some clips of the final version of the dance to provide some examples of how hybridity influenced the quality of the choreography. So I'm going to stop my share and give it to Kayt to share the video.
Okay, can you see what you need to see, Sarah?
I can see it.
Great, here we go.
All right, so the first section we're going to show is the entrance of the witch or crone character, who we created as another embodiment of hybridity between human and more than human in the piece, and is a more direct reference to the folkloric research that we conducted. Next, we were inspired by cow paths in mapping the ways in which dancers entered and exited the space. This clip shows dancers following a winding pathway to the crone. The offerings they give her are another example of how the human and non-human worlds overlap through artifacts. This next section demonstrates how the bovine anatomy influenced the movement quality in the dance. For example, the whip of the head, the foot patterns inspired by hooves, and the movement on the sagittal plane. Here is another section which demonstrates prescribed pathways and unison movement that is open to individual interpretation.
Sara, you have 2 more minutes.
And then lastly, the final section of the pattern into the escape of the runaway.
So in conclusion, this project has allowed us an opportunity to reimagine human and cattle relationships While mimicry was never our goal, our methodology was guided by empathy, which we have determined is more of a process than a goal to be attained. Through observation and embodied practice, we experienced this project as an interspecies collaboration, which built an empathetic bridge between the human and more than human experiences. In our future work, we will continue to investigate hybridity as an opportunity to reimagine mythologies that both integrate and distinguish between the human and more than human worlds. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. And I think we maybe have about 10 minutes or so for questions and discussion if people are interested.
So thank you very much, Sara and Kayt, for the fascinating presentation. If anyone wants to ask a question or say anything, now's the time. So until anyone will raise their hand, actually, I would like to ask something. When I watched your presentation, actually, I saw the opportunity in it. We talk all the time about Umwelt. I don't know if you are aware of this concept, but it's to perceive the life world of different species of animals. And in that concept is the perception that we cannot experience their experience because we are different also in our embodiment, our gaze, where we're looking at our senses. And when I thought about starting to move or how to feel the movement of another species and feel it in my own body, I started to see the enormous potential in it to understand the other, even if it starts only as an impression. So for me, also theoretically, but also practically in everyday life and education, it's amazing. And I wanted to know actually if you heard or thought about the concept of Umwelt?
We didn't think about exactly that term, but we did think about this idea of empathy and how I will never be a cow, so I will never know how a cow feels, and I will never be another person, so I won't know how that person feels either. But there's a practice of, that's why we were discussing a lot the idea of empathy being a practice, as something that's continuous and something that's an action and that's a verb almost more than a noun, and as opposed to a goal that can be achieved, like, oh, now I understand what it's like to be you. And with acknowledging that we will never completely understand, I do agree that there are these ways to, even having my spine horizontal to the ground, I see something different. And I have a different sensation of what is around me, what my environment is. So I do think that there's a lot of potential in embodiment as little steps in the process of trying to empathize.
I would add to that so much of what we study as dancers is the pursuit of unison and the act of or rejection of unison. And that's as ambitious or unattainable as empathy. You know, it is a practice of aiming for something that you will only ever come close to and not quite achieve. So, and then the idea of kind of being in like this interspecies unison was particularly challenging, but did kind of utilize skills that we as embodied artists kind of have honed in certain ways.
So thank you very much for your answers. Is there anyone who would like to ask another thing? Okay, I think if no one else wants, so I can talk a lot about what I saw. And first of all, I must say that when I read the abstract of that of your piece, I never imagined that this is what I'm going to see.
Mhm.
And for me, the picture, when you saw the anatomy of a human being and a cat, it just became so obvious to me that I think it's a basic thing to do when we learn human-animal relations. The emphasis on the embodiment, which is to feel the other, to be the other. But I also think about the concept of hybridity in the context of your presentation, and I'm not sure exactly if it is in hybridity for me, because I think it's a new thing, but I don't know, there's a difference between what I saw and what I feel about it theoretically, and when people usually talk about hybridity. So I think it might need a new concept for it.
I think that's an interesting thing to think about, is right, developing a whole new title and concept. When you talk about the anatomy of being a two-legged creature or a four-legged creature, and the way I do think anatomy is another access point, at least for me, when it comes to empathy, like kind of thinking about how the inner workings and the makings up of beings are similar and dissimilar. And so there is some, I get that relates to hybridity for me, in the sense that that things can look so different, but be in some ways relatable. And then I also, and when I was listening to Jane speak as well, and the people who presented before us, I think in our research, imagination plays a huge part in the pursuit of empathy, and in hybridity. So there is, yeah, it could be like also the act of imagining another term, or another theoretical approach to, another term to kind of harness the imaginative aspect of hybridity as well.
Yes, absolutely. And
Sorry.
I also, to add to that, I think there's this idea of accepting or embracing in this imagination impurity, or thinking different, rethinking how we might think about the idea of being one thing. And since we interact so much with the environment around us, and we have lots of other creatures, beings making up our own being in so many different ways. And the thinking about that, often in these folk tales, the hybrid beast is something undesirable or something grotesque, and rethinking what potential might that have to empathize, or what potential might that have in this imagination sense to kind of destabilize what we think of as being one thing, or being an individual that's separate from a human, that's separate from the animal world. But I agree that it needs a new term, or there's a lot of discussion around that to be done.
So thank you both very, very much. And so I would like to thank all of you, actually, all our participants. And thank you for this inspiring presentation. And today, so I will sum up Today, we had various presentations dealing with the subject, a central subject to our field of knowledge, opportunities in a changing reality. For example, we explored the possibility of leading social change through conversation on films, or another example is promoting awareness of animal suffering in the Anthropocene. So we will meet here again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. for lectures in Hebrew, and at 4 p.m. for the English presentation. And it will be a day focusing on conversations in and about human-animal relations. So thank you very much, and I'm honored. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for staying with us.